The gas station was still humming, its fluorescent lights flickering indifferently, illuminating the deserted road along the quiet highway in Bakersfield, California. It was late, too late for pedestrians, but early enough for a few travelers to stop by, refuel and grab a snack. Obadiah Kane stepped out of the convenience store, a bottle of water still slightly cold in his hand. He stopped, taking a deep breath in the fragile silence of the night. The smell of gasoline, the heat from the road mixed with the chirping of crickets somewhere in the distance. It was a simple scene, but to Obadiah, every moment like that was worth cherishing. After years of fighting, standing between life and death so many times, now he just wanted to enjoy the smallest things. Then headlights swept past, breaking the peaceful night. A patrol car braked, tires crunching on loose gravel. Inside, Officer Brent Calloway stared at the silhouette of a man who had just stepped out of the store. Obadiah didn't see the look, didn't see the tension tightening around the officer's hand on the gun. Recent reports of suspicious activity around the gas station flashed through Calloway's mind. A flashy-looking car, a man standing alone at night, all of it blended into a scenario he'd heard too many times. Intuition screamed in his mind, this could be a potential danger. Obadiah still didn't notice. He fumbled with the cap of his water bottle, his eyes following the road's surface, illuminated by distant headlights. Only when a shout rang out did he jerk back. Hold still. Put your hands up. Confused. Their eyes met for a fragile moment. Obadiah slowly raised his hand, the water bottle slipping from his rough fingers. The silence of the night was suddenly shattered by an explosion. Then everything froze. The pain spread like a wave, and Obadiah collapsed, a cold feeling spreading from the wound. He gasped, his eyes wide as if he wanted to say something, but there was no time. Calloway stood there, his hand still gripping the gun, his fingers shaking. He looked down at the man before him, and for the first time, he truly saw Obadiah Kane. Not just a shadow in the dark, not just a nameless suspicion. A person, a soul. He had made a mistake. It was too late. Obadiah Kane leaned back in his SUV, chewing his mint gum slowly, then tossed it into the passenger seat without a second thought. The night was quiet, save for the soft wind blowing through the deserted parking lot. He sensed no approaching threat. Until a voice cut through the silence like a whip. Hands. Put your hands where I can see them. Obadiah froze. His head turned slowly, enough to take in the scene. Under the flickering streetlights, he saw the glint of metal, a gun pointed directly at his chest. Calloway, the young cop, had a slight shake in his hand, but his posture was tense and rigid. His finger was on the trigger, ready to pull it at any moment. For a split second, Obadiah's body reacted before his mind could. Every survival instinct from decades of war, decades of training, decades of life-or-death decisions flared inside him. But he didn't move an inch. Because this wasn't a battlefield. This wasn't Afghanistan. This wasn't Iraq. This wasn't the war-torn desert where he'd faced down insurgents and lived to tell the story. This was home. And the look in Calloway's eyes told him none of that mattered right now. The cop's adrenaline was pumping at its peak. His breathing was ragged, in short bursts, but his eyes were sharp. There was no doubt that he didn't see a veteran, he didn't see a general, he didn't see someone who had shed blood for this country. He saw only a threat. Obadiah understood how fragile this moment was. If he made the wrong move, if he made one jerk in the wrong direction, the night could end in blood. He slowly raised his hands to his chest, keeping them open and visible. His voice was low and calm, the way he had spoken to young soldiers about to make a mistake of no return. "Officer, what's the matter?" But Calloway didn't hear him. The moment stretched like an eternity. The tension hung heavy in the air, making time freeze. Obadiah could feel every heartbeat, every drop of sweat rolling down the back of his neck. Then flashing red and blue lights filled the parking lot. A second police car pulled up, the door swinging open. A new voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. "Wait! Stop!" And in that instant, the tables turned. Obadiah didn't dare breathe. He stood still, as if any movement might shatter the thin ice between life and death. His hands remained raised, not daring to lower them, not daring to create any opportunity for error. He had seen what happened when men in uniform made snap decisions. Split-second choices, life-ending mistakes. But this wasn't a battlefield. There were no invisible enemies, no snipers lurking in the trees, no radio announcing air support. Just a gas station parking lot, the yellow lights, the smell of gasoline, and a young cop with a gun pointed at him. The situation was getting worse. Obadiah could see in the tense eyes of Officer Brent Calloway a storm of fear and doubt. He didn't see a human standing in front of him. He didn't see a veteran, a man who had spent his life serving his country. No. He saw only a dark silhouette in the night, an expensive SUV, a vague suspicion, and a reason, however flimsy, to put his finger on the trigger. Obadiah had lived through worse. He grew up in Louisiana, when some gas stations refused to let him in. His father was a mechanic who had told him, "They will always judge you first. Your job is to not give them anything to hold on to." So he worked twice as hard. He had walked through the gates of West Point, he had spent 3 decades proving himself on the battlefield. His name carried weight in the military. In some parts of the world, when he walked into a room, men stood and saluted. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. Because tonight, his rank wouldn't save him. His voice was calm, carefully controlled, as if he were coaxing a wild animal about to attack. "Officer, I'm getting my wallet." He moved slowly, inch by inch, as if each inch was a step on a tightrope stretched across a chasm. His fingers barely moved as they moved toward his pockets. But Calloway tensed instantly. "Don't move." Obadiah froze. His hands were still raised, fingers spread wide as if to prove they were empty. His jaw was tight, but his face remained calm. He knew this. He'd seen it before. He'd heard the stories. He'd seen the names on the news, the faces frozen on the screen, the bullets fired in a millisecond but leaving lasting consequences. He knew what people like Calloway were telling themselves. A cop drew his gun. A shot rang out. And another man never came home again. He moved too fast. Calloway didn't know how many times he blinked, but when he came back to consciousness, Obadiah was still there. Not advancing, not retreating, not shifting. But the sense of movement was still there, lingering in the air like a breeze through dry leaves. The unease gripped Calloway. He was acting suspiciously, very suspiciously. A normal person didn't stand like that, not balanced perfectly in the flickering lights of a gas station. Calloway felt fear creep into his knuckles, clenching the grip of his gun. An urge, an invisible warning, ran down his spine. He had a weapon. He definitely had a weapon. There was no way Obadiah could just be standing there with nothing in his hand. But no, Obadiah hadn't handed it to him. There was no flash of gun, no glint of steel. So why was the sense of danger still burning in Calloway's chest? Obadiah could barely breathe. His face was still, unresponsive, but there was something in his eyes that made Calloway unable to look away. A pang, a dawning truth. And Calloway realized, his finger, on the trigger, had been twitching. For the first time tonight, Obadiah sensed possibility. Real possibility. That this kid, in his barely faded police uniform, could actually pull the trigger. Not because he wanted to kill, but because he believed he would be killed. A false belief, but enough to lead to tragedy. Then the tires screeched. Red and blue lights filled the parking lot, dancing over oil-stained puddles. Another police car was faster than expected. Calloway didn't look, didn't care. But Obadiah did. He saw the second officer step out. And recognized him instantly. Vanessa Grayson. The change in the air was instantaneous. Like a storm about to hit. She knew him, and everything was about to change. Grayson moved fast, too fast. Without hesitation, without stopping to assess. She didn't need to. She'd been on the force long enough to know when a rookie was overextended. When a situation was on the verge of exploding. And right now, it was only a breath away. A civilian raised his hand. A cop with his gun still unloaded. Calloway breathed heavily, his breath caught in his throat. He knew another officer had arrived, but he didn't realize what it meant. He was still locked in his thoughts, in the invisible fear that gripped him. This man is acting suspiciously, he repeated to himself, the voice in his head sharp, defensive. I need him in handcuffs. Grayson didn't even acknowledge Calloway. Her eyes were still locked on Obadiah. She knew that face. She'd seen it in military papers, in briefings. She knew exactly who he was. And she knew that if she didn't act now, she would witness an irreversible mistake. Calloway held the gun tight, her finger on the trigger. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The surroundings were suffocating in a thick fog of adrenaline and hindsight. She knew, one wrong move, one moment of loss of control, and everything would slip away. But she had one chance. Just one chance to keep things from going beyond the point of no return. She took a deep breath, suppressing the trembling in her chest, and said carefully. Calloway. Her words weren't a plea, not a command. Simply a call, a door opening in the chaos. She kept her voice steady, emotionless, but the weight of it was enough to cut through the tense atmosphere. She lowered the gun. The action was enough to freeze Calloway. His head jerked toward her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise, confusion, and suppressed rage. But he didn't obey immediately. His eyes were still bright with suspicion, with an instinct for self-preservation that wouldn't be taken away. Her voice wasn't louder than before, but it had a new edge now, a sharp blade that demanded attention that couldn't be ignored. That man is General Obadiah Kane. The words were like a gunshot in the silence. The color drained from Calloway's face. His fingers loosened in his grip on the gun, as if the gravity of the new realization had suddenly settled on his shoulders. Beside him, Grayson stepped forward, his voice low and heavy. You just pointed a gun at a 4-star general. A sick feeling rose in Calloway's gut. The shock washed over him like a cold wave, drowning him in what he had almost done. He knew the name. Heard it before. But the pieces didn't connect in time. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Obadiah watched him closely, the eyes of someone who had seen this look too many times before, not just from police, not just from soldiers, but from people who realized too late that they had crossed a line of no return. Calloway's breathing quickened. He glanced between Obadiah and Grayson, his confidence shattering like fragile glass. But they all sensed it, something else was happening. A shift. A point of no return. A small light. Bright but weak. A red dot. A recording symbol. And then. Jesus, did you see this? A voice. An observer. A phone. Suddenly, this wasn't just an accident. This was proof. The video spread like wildfire. It started with a single clip, rough and shaky, posted by the first witness who was quick enough to film it. But then other angles emerged, other voices, other perspectives, all telling the same story. A general being honored, with a gun pointed at his face. A young officer, unflinching. Within hours, the image was everywhere. On television. On social media. On the front page of every newspaper. The headlines were unforgiving. They exposed. They criticized. They questioned. And all that was left was the dead silence of those involved, as they realized they no longer had control of the story. The meeting had been carefully planned, but it had turned into a nightmare. In the middle of the conference room, the lights were shining brightly on the large mirrors, and there was a moment of deadly silence. Then a shout rang out, sharp and tense. "Stand still! Don't move!" The rookie officer Calloway, his eyes still shining with the innocence of someone who had never faced real danger, aimed his gun at General Kane, a symbol of courage, a war hero, a man who had once carried the fate of an entire nation on his shoulders. A shot rang out. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Kane fell to his knees, holding the wound on his shoulder, blood soaking his dignified uniform. The soldiers around him were stunned. A shock swept through the room, the atmosphere thickened. And then, the storm truly exploded. The next morning, every big and small screen across the country was broadcasting the same story. Phones, tablets, laptops, all were filled with the shocking footage: a four-star general, a national hero, shot in the middle of a formal meeting, by a young cop. In coffee shops, office break rooms, family living rooms, everyone was talking. Whispers, boos, angry questions. Outrage burned like wildfire. Veterans were the first to speak up. This man risked his life to protect this country. And this is how we treat him, a former Marine snarled in a live interview, his eyes red with rage. The backlash didn't stop there. You think this is just a mistake? No, this is a pattern. Twitter exploded with the hashtags, #JusticeForKane, #PoliceReformNow, #RestoreHonor. Instagram stories were flooded with clips, angry tweets. Reddit became a battleground for endless debate. Not just about General Kane. Not just about a stray bullet. But about all the times a black person was seen as a threat before they were seen as a human being. Every wrongful stop. Every wrongful arrest. Every life taken because of a split-second decision. But this time, the victim survived. This time, the Bakersfield Police Department was backed into a corner. Within 24 hours, Officer Calloway was suspended. The mayor rushed to issue a statement: "We take this very seriously." The police chief, looking tense, tried to control the damage at a press conference: "We acknowledge the seriousness of this situation. A full investigation is underway." But no one wanted excuses. They wanted action. While Calloway hid behind the bureaucracy, public anger continued to rise. This was more than an accident. This was a turning point. This time, justice could not be overlooked. Obadiah Kane wasn't in it for the fame. Not for the flashing lights or the explosive statistics on social media. He wasn't on television to tell his own story. He was here to talk about a larger reality, one that too many people have faced, but not everyone has had the chance to tell. The requests for interviews poured in. He could have turned them down, but instead he took one. A chance to speak, to ask questions, to make the world listen. The CBS studio was cold, the lights were sharp as knives, but Obadiah didn't flinch. He had been in the middle of battle, he had faced moments where a wrong decision could mean death. But this moment, was just as important. He sat up straight, his gaze steady, facing the host. The world was watching. General Kane, the host, leaned forward, his tone both respectful and probing. "The video of your encounter has been viewed millions of times. Walk us through what you were thinking at that moment." Obadiah was silent for a moment. He was in no hurry. Then, in a steady voice, the voice of someone who had commanded under fire, who had seen his comrades fall, he replied. "I thought about how close I came, almost to being just another name on a list." The room fell silent. A heavy silence passed. No one interrupted. Not even the host. He continued, his eyes never leaving the camera. "That cop didn't see me, not really. He saw a story he had written in his head. A pattern. An outcome he thought was inevitable." His voice was steady. No anger, no drama. Just the truth. "And how many times has this happened? How many times has it ended differently?" He clasped his hands together, as if feeling the weight of the question he had just posed. "I'm alive, because I know how to stay calm. Because I've been trained to handle high-pressure situations. He paused, took a slow breath. But should survival depend on that? Silence filled the studio, spilled out onto the screen, and into the millions of hearts watching. No one could turn away from the question. Before the interview had even aired, the video exploded on social media. His words weren't just heard. They were felt. And this time, the world couldn't ignore it. I survived because I knew how to keep my cool. But was that enough to survive? The cop didn't see me. He saw a target. Veterans, activists, community leaders, all stood up. The words were no longer echoes in the void. The conversation changed. This wasn't just an incident, this was a system. A system that allowed this to happen. Over and over again. The Bakersfield Police Department was forced to speak up. The chief held another press conference. His face was weary, but was it remorse? We're reforming, they said. Mandatory training, de-escalation tactics, racial bias assessments. But the public wasn't satisfied. Protests erupted. Lawsuits arose. The Justice Department stepped in. And Officer Brent Calloway? He quietly resigned. No statement. No apology. No accountability. But Obadiah wasn't looking for an individual to blame. He was looking for change. Something bigger. The interview ended, the host tilted his head. General Kane, what do you hope will happen? Obadiah looked directly into the camera. Not at the interviewer. At everyone watching. We talk about protecting and serving. But that promise can't be selective. The studio fell silent. If a man can spend his life fighting for his country, only to come back and be seen as a threat, then our problem is much bigger. The camera held him for a second longer. Long enough for the weight of his words to sink in. Then the screen faded to black. But this story isn't just about one person. It's about the moments the cameras didn't catch. The mistakes that weren't reported. The lives that didn't get a second chance. Next time, the ending might be different. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? If this story makes you think, don't just scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. And most importantly, demand better.